I'm going to adjust valves today using the EOIC technique. That's exhaust open, intake closed. This will be on a solid roller application. We'll touch base on basically how to adjust a rocker as soon as you find the base circle of the cam, and it applies to hydraulic roller camshafts as well. So the first thing that I use, which is a great friend that I've discovered, is a remote starter. These things are extremely handy. You don't have to rely on somebody inside the car with you yelling at them to bump the engine over, and of course if somebody screws up, then you have to wait for the cam to come one complete revolution back into its base circle before you can adjust that valve. The other thing I use is a box end wrench. I use sockets sometimes, but I don't like the way that it contacts the rocker and the perimeter right here, and can leave marks and stuff. And then of course I have my little Allen tool. I had an Allen socket, but naturally it got lost in the engine base, well, not in the engine, but in the engine base somewhere. I can't find it. My neighbors discovered that I couldn't find it either, so I don't know if they like me very much anymore. But anyway, without further ado, so we're going to bump the engine over. We're going to find the base circle on the intake side. So with the EOIC method, that means the exhaust valve is just starting to open. With this cam, since it's a solid roller, it's going to be a lot more aggressive, so it's very touchy when you bump start it. So just loosen the adjusting nut, and I'm going to loosen the poly lock as well, my trusty little Allen tool. And then what you can do with a hydraulic roller is get your hand, and I always like to do the up-down method instead of the twisting method. To me it just seems a lot more consistent when you're looking for play, but this really only works with aftermarket rockers, it seems. When you have stock ones, they don't turn quite as easily. I don't think you can use finger pressure in order to turn the adjusting nut, but naturally you just tighten just until the slack stops. You stop it right there. Then you take your wrench. I like to use a wrench when doing preset, because it's just, to me it's a much more accurate, but you put it down whatever preset you want, and you turn your wrench either quarter turn or half turn or full turn, whatever. But because this is a solid roller, I find my lash by sticking in my 17,000 feeler gauge. I put the adjusting nut down and keep it in there, keep the feeler gauge in there, and then grab my Allen key and my socket wrench, or my box end wrench, and I adjust or tighten up the poly lock. And with a solid roller, I believe in go or no go, meaning that if you can't get your feeler gauge in there, it's a no-go, then you need a readjustment. And of course if you can get it in there, then it's somewhat properly adjusted. But with a solid roller, it's a technique. You have to get a feel for it. It's like I can stick my feeler gauge in there, but it feels loose to me. I've read on the internet and other sources where when you stick your feeler gauge into the rocker, you want it for it to be like sticking a knife through cold butter. So with my technique, I just kind of tighten down the adjusting nut a little more, kind of torque it down a bit, and that's a go. It's firm, but I know that's adjusted properly. Then what I do is I give the engine a few revolutions. And then I recheck it. To see if it's stuck, and it seems to still be properly adjusted. The other thing too, you'll see me fighting like that. Some of the reason why is because when you stick a feeler gauge in there, you want to make sure you're at the correct angle when you stick it in. With these, since these engines are in such a cramped engine compartment, sometimes you'll have the feeler gauge up or down or something like that, and it'll feel really tight when it goes in, and then you'll get a different reading altogether if you stick the feeler gauge in again. So you just want to make sure that you're at the correct angle. So now that the intake is done, we're going to move on to the exhaust valve. And you want to, when you're bump starting the motor, you want the intake to be almost closed before you know that your exhaust valve is on, or that your lifter is on the base circle of the cam. So there goes a lifter for the intake valve. And again, this is really touchy, so have to be careful. But I'm just going to check the lash on this. So seems pretty good. But that's basically the way that you adjust with the EOIC method.